Hi, everybody. Scott Van Hooley here, welcoming you to the next installment on our webinar series. Get your shop ready, be prepared for ADAS repairs. So we'll get into the content in a little bit here. I am Scott Van Hooley. I've been with iCar for a little over 10 years, was a collision repair technician, did jobs start to finish, estimating, a little bit of everything in the shop. Started out at iCar as an instructional designer. And then when we started the RTS team, I was one of the founding members of that and have been doing that ever since. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bud.
Good. Hey, good. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bud Center. I'm the manager of technical research and development in the iCar Tech Center. I've been with iCar about 4 years, in the industry closer to 36 or 7 years. And like Scott just talked about, started as a tech, moved into management years later, and then into senior leadership with some of the MSOs out there, and spent some time on the insurance side of the industry as well. So welcome to the latest installment.
And with that, we'll pull up the PowerPoint here. Bud,
all right, so some of you guys may have noticed that one of the Hollywood squares that's normally here is empty, and that's Mr. Jeffrey Poole. Unfortunately, Jeff's father passed away, so Jeff is not able to join us today. I never had the honor of meeting Vernon Poole, but I can tell you that from all the stories from Jeff, I feel like I know him. Anybody that's ever spent any time with Jeff, almost everything he says starts with "Dad always says," and he's got a lot of stories. They shared a lot of passion for airplanes and collision repair and cars and things like that. So Jeff, we're thinking about you and your family. We miss you, and we'll see you soon.
All right. It's always sad news, and thoughts and prayers with Jeff and family. And I'm sure he'd want us to carry on and get this conversation going.
So there's supposed to be one more guest.
Yes.
We might as well let everybody know Jake Roth is going to join us. Jake's run into a little bit of technical difficulty with his computer, and as soon as he gets that set up, you'll see him pop into the screen and he'll join us.
Okay. And so while we're waiting for Jake, we'll start the conversation. Better be right because it believes you. So I think all of us have seen the gentleman that was calibrating a camera using a ladder and a printed target. And when I was putting this PowerPoint together, I started looking for that and discovered that a whole bunch of people think that is a great idea and have now printed that target and put it on a ladder, and they're telling that camera that's how far away it is. And if you look right below, here is what the target should actually be looking like. And it's a little bit different in size. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about today.
Yeah, so Scott, as you were saying, the tools and equipment required to do these ADAS repairs, it's a very long list if you're going to have all the tools and equipment you need for every vehicle out there. In some cases, it may make sense for the shops to look at the types of vehicles that are being repaired in their facilities most frequently, and maybe purchase tools and equipment for those. It may make sense to use one of those services similar to, or such as like Aztec or AirPro or some of the others that are out there that perform those type of repairs for you or can assist with that. But it's a fairly significant investment to have everything you need in there. Most of the vehicles are going to have specific targets for cameras and different targets again for different vehicles, sometimes within the same vehicle maker lineup. Then you get into things like radars, and you have a completely different sensor, or a completely different target again for calibrating those types of systems. So the investment into these things is pretty substantial.
Yeah, and one thing that you have to keep in mind, the OEMs have different strategies. So Audi is one that a lot of their targets for different things are actually built into the alignment system, where they have a board and a target and all those kinds of things built right into their required tools. And so if you don't have that specific equipment, you might not be able to get all the tools and equipment. And if you don't work on a lot of Audis, because that's a question we get all the time is, well, what should I buy? What's the best thing for me? And it's rather difficult to say because it depends on your market.
Right.
And it looks like Jake finally got his computer working.
No, I had to go to a plan B. When it says your computer's going to update and this may take a while, that's not a good sign. So I had to go to the home computer. So sorry I'm late.
All right. So Jake, why don't you go through your introduction and we'll continue on.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Jake Roth. I'm the director of OEM and industry technical relations for Aztec. I handle a lot of our OEM relationships. Also do some training and stuff for the industry, whether it's insurers or shops or whoever it might be. I started my career as a technician on the service side. Worked at a Mercedes-Benz dealership, processing service and warranty and things like that. I worked in a collision repair shop for about 14 years, Jaguar structural aluminum facility. Also worked with a national consolidator, Aber Auto Body and Glass, as an operations manager doing acquisitions and things like that. Been at Aztec since 2015. Was actually with Aztec in the very beginning of the company's life, and then came back and have been back since 2015.
Well, great. Well, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
So we just started the conversation about the tools and equipment, and better be right because it believes you. And if you don't have the right equipment and the right targets, what that does. So you want to give us your insight on that, Jake?
Yeah, it's kind of scary. It seems like a well-aimed Google search. You can find all kinds of things out there. I've seen clipboards with people who have drawn the targets. I've seen targets on the phone where they hold the phone in front of the ADAS, in front of the camera and hit go. I know that this is probably something that might offend some people, but I've even seen some professional companies out there resizing targets in an effort to try and standardize and create a one-size-fits-all T-shirt. And unfortunately, until an OEM's engineering team gives that the nod, who says you can do it? So kind of scary, and we pick on this lane watch system with Honda, and they've since moved away from this system, but there's a lot of the general public out there that think this is a great idea, and they really just don't understand the consequence. So, the target is one thing, but I think even scarier is the measurement, where they've got the Honda approved step ladder there at the rear door handle. And when you look in the service manual, that changes by wheelbase. So if that was an Odyssey, it would be different than an Accord. An Accord would be different than a Civic, right? So just because you were successful with one car, don't think you'll be successful with the next one, And so, yeah, kind of alarming, But I think if you dig deep, you look at it, a technician's natural instinct is just to fix, just to go in there and make it happen because it has to go at 5, right? And so, I know why shops are trying to and technicians are trying to do this, but with this technology, you just can't do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught any of our earlier webinars, Jake, but I told a story that you'll probably remember because we were out at your Texas facility. But we had that Honda, and you and Bram were out there and going to show us how that automatic braking worked. And you put the target up there, and that car punted that target about 50 yards across the parking lot because it had been calibrated with something other than the OEM target. And
you're probably going to get me in trouble. You're probably going to firsthand. It was the epitome of don't try this at home, but and actually I just spent some time with an OEM in the last couple of days, and there is no test drive for automatic emergency braking. They look at you and they say, well, would you test drive the airbags you just installed? And I'm like, well, probably not, it's just like a just in case, right? So, we were fortunately in a very safe environment. We weren't going to hit a car, but the systems do work, and it's amazing how intuitive they really are and how smart they are, and they only get smarter. So I think as technicians and shops, we've got to get smart with them, and we've got to catch up in a lot of cases.
Yep, agreed.
Well, and I think, kind of to your point earlier, I think as, collision techs, for so many years, we didn't have, great repair information. So all we had to do was figure it out. We had to figure out how to take that door off. We had to, figure out how to put that rail in using the general sectioning guidelines that no longer apply, people. We still get questions on that as well. But I think, you know, overcoming that mentality of I can figure it out is a little bit of a challenge, because that's so ingrained in the culture of the shops and in the insurance companies as well, that, well, they can just figure it out. They fix things, and you know, you can make it work. And that's just, with these advanced systems, it's just not possible anymore.
Yeah, and then add into it how difficult it is to find these procedures. In some cases, you get into these service manuals, and you've got little pieces of the repair process sprinkled throughout the manual instead of all in one place. And it's a lot about understanding how to follow that trail through the service manual to get the information that you need to get these things repaired correctly.
Well, I think another thing that you see is, you know, an OEM. I've spent a lot of time with them lately, and it feels like an octopus with multiple arms that doesn't talk to each other. And so, you know, it's one of those things where you have the scan tool team, the scan tool group, you have the collision group, you have, you know, the service manual group, you got the regulatory affairs group, you got the legal group, you got all these different groups, and, you know, they may or may not know what each group is working on. It's very compartmentalized. And so, you know, especially when you're dealing with, like I said, the session I was just in, we were going through the blind spot radar process, and there was no mention of that OEM's quarter panel that has a bracket that's welded on to the quarter panel, and the technician, the collision technician, has to weld that bracket in the right spot. And so when I was talking to the instructor, I said, you know, in your world, that bracket is just there, you know, because you're working on a service vehicle, right? In our world, we have to put it there. We have to actually place that bracket so the radar mounts up. And so it's just two different perspectives, both of them very valuable, but two different perspectives as it comes to this technology and the car in general. So I think a collision technician and a mechanical technician will look at the same car very differently.
Yeah. I've got another question for you here. We had one question come in here, and this is probably the right time to talk about it. I've answered this question so many times at events like CIC and some others, but people asking the question, when I've got an ADAS wiring harness that's damaged, can it be repaired?
An ADAS wiring harness.
So you've got a wiring harness to a sensor, the plug is damaged. It ultimately, right, it's always go back to the OEM service information, follow what they tell you.
Yeah.
But it's funny, there are so many people that think, well, it's just another piece of wire, so go ahead and fix it. It's not a big deal.
People will default to an airbag wire, to airbag wiring, right? They look at it like, well, it's airbag wiring. And it's like, well, no, it's not. I look at it like, does the OEM offer a service component for it?
Right.
Do they offer a pigtail for it? Yes or no? Is there a supporting procedure? And if there's not, who could I reach out to at that OEM to get some direction on that? It's kind of like a brand new car that doesn't have a sectioning procedure on a rail. We're the first ones to touch that car in collision repair. So a lot of times they haven't thought about that, And so I think that as you're facing those kinds of things, don't assume that you know. Ask out and reach out to people. And if you can't get a clear answer, then obviously 100% replacement is always the best way to go. But I'm big on repairability of these cars. I don't want to see, I don't think consumers want to see their cars totaled for minor damage. I don't think that's good for anybody, the brand, the shop, anybody. So I think that keeping these cars as repairable as possible puts a tremendous challenge on OEMs and vendors and suppliers like myself. So we're trying to do the best we can.
Yeah, and typically I've seen it where if the OEM allows wiring repair, the ADAS sensor wires are not all that different than the traditional wiring. And if you're following their guidelines, they don't have any special callouts for the ADAS, but they all have different requirements for that wiring repair. So always check it before you do it, just check the OEM information. And if you're having trouble finding it, you can reach out to Ask iCar. We'll help you guide you right to it.
Well, you look at like FCA, right, where they have a procedure for repairing airbag wiring as long as you use their crimp tool, right, and you use their procedure to do it. That's a great example of where you ask 9 out of 10 collision repairs like, you can't repair airbag wiring. I'm like, whoa, what car? What vehicle? Because it's very specific. So if there's a published procedure, I say rock and roll, and document accordingly.
Totally agree. All right. So the next slide here is space, the final frontier. And, we get the question all the time, how much space do I need to do a calibration? What's the ideal setup? And there's so many answers to that. We want to talk about it. And Jake, why don't you start us off?
Well, at Aztec, we have a couple of full-scale calibration centers. And, for people that are shops that are looking to get into that business, I know that our president, Tony Remus, would tell you, not to buy that, not to buy what we have, because it's simply from an ROI perspective, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, And so what I tell the shops, I'm like, what are your top 5 brands? What are the top 5 brands that you work on? Down here in sunny Florida, I don't see a lot of Subarus and a lot of, even really pickup trucks and stuff like that. They're here, but they're not as thick as sports cars and things like that, So I look at it like, what are the top 5 brands you work on, and make your calibration and tooling decisions off of that. It's kind of like jumping into aluminum when you don't get that many aluminum cars, So I would look at it and use it based on data. Don't use your gut feeling on what you think it is. Run your CCC indicator report for the last 5 years. Have your paint supplier do a GMAP for you around your facility on what makes and models are being sold, and make a really good sound decision on the top 5 brands you're going to work on. And once you've got those top 5 brands identified, start with one. Start with one OEM that says, what, we're going to tackle their ADAS procedures head on, and we're going to buy the targeting, and we're going to have a provider that does the OEM scanning for us, whether it's in-house or remote or whatever it is. And just don't make it an impulse buy, because I think there's a lot of folks that are trying to jump into this, buying targeting systems that aren't approved, and it's not a good place to be. So, there's a lot of things that you can do in-house by taking them on one by one. And as your staff gets better and better with setting up the cars and all that kind of stuff, then you can move on to the next brand. But from what we've seen from a space perspective, our smallest facility is about 4,000 square feet. Because by the time you figure 360, that F-150 in the corner there is a great example. 360 cams, the Hondas went about 11 meters in front of them. That's my good friend Gonzalo actually measuring on the ground right there. So you got to consider that if Honda is one of your brands, it's a top 5 for you. Then you need to consider that. Look at all systems. Don't look at just front radar and camera. Look at blind spot too. Not all OEM blind spots require a target, so make sure you looked at that carefully. Nissan's a good example of that. So it's really a brand by brand decision. I don't think that it's a one size fits all decision.
Yeah, I've had conversations with a lot of folks in shops and gone out and visited shops, and it surprises me sometimes how many of the what I would consider high-end shops, you start talking to some of these guys and they think, well, I can just put the car in a stall, and as long as I can get the target in front of the vehicle, or I can get it, in place, that I'm good. And they don't understand that, in a lot of cases, the reflective surfaces make a difference. The patterns on the walls and the things surrounding the vehicle, is it picking up a signal for or bouncing off on something behind the vehicle that shouldn't be there. And it really is critical that you have the space available that is required for that calibration, so that it's picking up the right signal.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can see Gonzalo's got a pen in his hand. Our floor is actually a big dry erase board, so that you can write the physical measurements on the floor. Now, in the service manual, it may or may not tell you to do that, but we look at it from a documentation perspective and as an SOP. It makes a good amount of sense when you're trying to take photos of this stuff to justify labor times and things like that. It's really, really a good idea to write on the floor. And like I said, it cleans up after when you pull the next car in. But the floor is a big one. There's a lot of dusty body shop floors out there, and you want to make sure that it's not a wild color with a bunch of patterns, and it's not real shiny and things like that. Ours is pretty dull. And when they do the F-150 calibration that you have pictured there, the guys actually do that one with their socks on. They take their shoes off because they have to walk on the target when they're working around the truck. So, there's all little things that you kind of got to think about when you're doing this. But, similar to when in my prior life at a body shop, we took on aluminum repair. At that time, it was one car. It was one car that was aluminum intensive. And so now you're trying to justify the investment in the space that you just dedicated to that aluminum car. So if you don't have calibrations due, maybe you can dual purpose that space for disassembly and reassembly. Don't do any welding in there, and don't do any grinding and things like that and metal work, but maybe you could utilize it for disassembly and reassembly to try and offset some of the cost of dedicating the space.
Well, and one thing too that a lot of shops don't realize is even if you have, the floor pots or you have a floor drain where you want to do that calibration, if that 360 mat goes over there and you can see it in the mat, that's not going to work. Your space is no longer functional for that procedure, which is a little bit mind-boggling that it's that sensitive, but that's what these cameras and sensors are there for. They're there to be sensitive and give accurate information.
Right. Well, I'm sorry. Now let's talk about the fact that the shops that are not designed for this and the slope of the floor and how that plays into this, and making sure that you've got a level surface when you're working on these things. It all makes a difference.
I think both of you have been to Vegas, where our office there, and we had a tremendous expense of leveling the floor. There was about, 6 or 7 inches of concrete that we had to add. When we walked in, the floor looked great, but when you actually started leveling it, because we had a robot sliding down that floor, so it absolutely had to be level, and it was a lot of expense to do that. But the one thing I was going to say about the metal is Toyota actually calls out in their millimeter wave radar a certain section in front of the car can have no metal, so no metal in the floor or anything like that, and so it can really prohibit and kind of tie your hands if you've got to deal with those kinds of environmental challenges.
So the next slide, documentation. Bud, why do we hit on that one so hard?
Well, we had a webinar that was dedicated to documentation and test drives and all those things, but if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So if you're going to do these ADAS repairs, a good practice is probably printing the procedure, putting it in the file, make sure that you've got that most recent procedure. Have, as Jake had mentioned, when you're doing these measurements and setting the location for the target, right? If you're not writing it on the floor, maybe a piece of tape you can put on the floor and you can write on that, and then taking pictures, confirming that you've got the target set at the right spot. When you're done with all that, documentation of all of your tests to make sure that the systems are functioning properly. If it's a road test, what did you do? Where did you go? How did you drive the vehicle? All of those things matter if it ever comes to a situation where you have to be able to defend the repair. So it's that it's critical. You've got to document everything you do.
Yeah, I would say that the training that I just went through with Nissan, they were very quick to point out what mile per hour each system comes on. Whether it's blind spot or rear cross traffic alert. 2 different systems that use the actual same radar. So I look at it like, don't put blanket statements on your estimate for test drive point whatever. What are you test driving for? What systems, what miles per hour do you need to reach to meet the test drive requirement, right? And depending where you live, if your shop is in a busy downtown area, downtown Chicago, downtown Spaghetti Junction, Atlanta, or wherever, then that test drive could be pretty intense because you have to reach a certain mile per hour. You may have to get away from the shop to do that. And so I think explain that not only to insurers important, but also a customer. If they see somebody driving around in their car and we didn't have that discussion at drop-off, it could be a bad situation. And now with the onslaught of connected cars and telematics, they may have visibility of that, where they know where you're driving around and they see miles per hour on their car. And so it's just critical that we identify what do we need to do as far as the test drive goes, and how are we going to explain that. And, there's going to be some people that hit you up for gas and things like that, and so that happens, but documenting the calibration just has to be done. I mean, if you think about documenting a frame rail or documenting an airbag, if your shop is still struggling with repair procedures on when they decide to use it, or if they even have access to it, do not jump into ADAS calibration. It is, that's running before you can walk. And it's one of those things that you need to research every line that you put on the estimate, because trust me when I tell you, you will find things that you're either not billing for or was a one-time use part and you didn't know it, or it had an ADAS calibration that was attached to it. And so my favorite example is the four-wheel alignments. I mean, that's usually a sublet and a repair facility. It never gets researched. Shops never look it up. They just send it down to, what's, Bob's Tire down the street, and they do the alignment and that's it. And it never gets researched. If it was a frame rail, then you got a better chance of it being researched. But it's scary when you start looking at four-wheel alignment procedures, and how on the new cars, they're very different than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you think about even you talk about research, and it kind of, for me, brings back the making sure that you're digging through the procedures and the OEM position statements and understanding when it's okay to repair these bumper covers and when it's not.
Yeah.
There are many OEs out there that say, well, if there's an ADAS sensor anywhere in the area, can't fix the cover. Some say you can't fix the covers at all, regardless of where the sensors are. And then there are others. I think I explained this on a previous webinar. I was reading some other things with BMW, and in some cases, depending on the color of the vehicle, it'll make a difference whether or not you can refinish that bumper at all. Depending on sensor technology, it may be that you can do a repair that's to the clear coat, but if it gets into the color, you can't refinish the bumper. So there's just so many things that you have to be able to research and understand when you're repairing these things. Yeah.
The root cause, though, there, Bud, is that as an industry, we know what we want to do. We want to pull that bumper off. We want to repair it. We want to paint it. That would be the best case scenario, right? So we need to stay to that root cause and say, okay, how do we do that on this Lexus LS460, the example you're talking about? And on that car, it calls out specific paint codes can only be painted so many times, right? And it's like, wow, we didn't know that, and if we didn't pull up the bumper procedure, we never would have known that. And so there's another one on a Lexus that's an RX that the hybrid has a different grille than the gas vehicle. And as a result, the sonar sensors are in a different position. They're higher on one grille than they are on the other. And they have two separate calibration files that you have to load to the car depending on what bumper you have. And so that affects the way the car's 360 works, its 360 cam works, and the way it parallel parks. So, something so small, all we wanted to do was a bumper, and now it's a parking issue. It's, it just blows up. And next thing you know, it's a hot sheet and it's a nasty gram and a Yelp rating that we didn't want, right? And so that's the stuff that, we're just trying to avoid that as proactively as possible.
Yep. Agreed. I think it's also understanding the technology on the vehicles. We ran into one situation, I think, where we had I want to say it was maybe a Jeep, and the shop had repaired the vehicle for hail damage. So it was only PDR. They took the bumper cover off for access and PDR, and then they put the front bumper back on. And when they put it on, they must have hit the ACC sensor in the front, and said, well, this is ready to go. And we just happened to be there, just to do a kind of an example calibration. And it turned out to be a very, very extensive calibration. It took a lot of time to get it right. And it's something that would have been missed had we not gone in there to do that sample calibration.
Yeah, and in that situation, a Jeep Cherokee would be very different than a Jeep Renegade. So domestics, or the FCA in particular, is mostly dynamic, with the exception of the Renegade. So the Renegade is static, and so it has a physical target and the whole bit. And it's just it's the oddball of the group, and it's a challenging one to do. It's about a $3,800 target, and there's some dealers that don't have it. And so next thing you know, it's just a little bumper job turns into this big mess, And so we're going to continue to face that stuff as new technology comes on. I mean, there's some stuff with the electric vehicles that are not even being talked about right now, and those are going to be really a challenge for us when all of those have to work on them, not just Tesla, right? And so it's going to be a big challenge for us, and you're going to see a lot of scan tool supported parts, is what I like to call them, where it requires a scan tool to actually install the part. And that could be mechanical parts, that could be body parts, there's nothing out of bounds. And so, research is going to be our friend, and the more that we embrace that, the better off we're going to be on not just the electronics, but the body structure as well.
Agreed.
Totally agree. So,
the lottery. Here we go, talking about the lottery ticket. For those that didn't hear it last time, we we thought it just made sense to throw it in here. You know, you think about the repairs that you're doing on these vehicles and the ADAS, and it's a very detail oriented type of thing. You've got to, it's, you know, the devil's in the details. You have to make sure that everything is in the correct spot, that you're doing it exactly as the vehicle maker tells you to do it. All it takes is one measurement that's wrong, or, you know, skipping one step that you missed there, and you just bought that lottery ticket that you didn't want. Now you've got a vehicle that's on the road that potentially is out there calibrated incorrectly, and you're just waiting on that number to come up, and it's, like I said, it's a lottery you don't want to win.
I think the big difference with putting a frame rail wrong or putting a quarter panel on wrong is that you're rolling the dice that shop won't be, or that car won't be hit in the same spot, and the driver's in it, right? But with electronics, not only do they leave a fingerprint behind, the chances are higher, because it's amazing how your newest consumers really rely on this stuff. They love the freedom that it gives them to take their eyes off the road for just a second, so they can link up their Spotify and play their radio, right? And so you're going to see more of that as more the digital natives come into the marketplace, and they're buying expensive cars or even entry level cars. They're not afraid to give up a little bit of freedom to connected cars and technology to embrace the things that they love, right? And they're connected to that phone, man. They will not put that phone down. And so those are the kinds of things as repairers we're going to have to be really sharp on that.
Yep, agreed.
Another thing that I haven't mentioned this before, but with COVID going on right now, I don't know what the statistic is, but online car buying is at an all-time high, right? People are buying cars online instead of going to a dealer and dealing with a sales guy, right? So if you look at that, the OEMs do a wonderful job of identifying what the technology is on their cars and explaining it in layman's terms and what it means to you, to a consumer. So now you've got somebody that bought a 2020 vehicle with full-blown ADAS, has everything on it. They understand safety shield and intelligent mobility and all these buzzwords that OEMs use. And, as repairers, if we're not buttoned up on that, we're not going to look too good. We're not going to look like product knowledge specialists. And that's what we've got to be, and so, I encourage the folks on the call to study as much as you can to stay current.
Yep, I would agree. We spend so much time in service manuals and vehicle information and making sure that we stay current with this stuff, and it's almost a full-time job, just making sure that you stay current with all the things that are new and coming out there. So I would agree completely.
And that's where we do a lot of articles on around a lot of the ADAS systems, how they work, what they're supposed to do, and the little nuances. Like Jake earlier, you talked about, you get a tail light, and all of a sudden before you replace that tail light, you got to download something out of the module and then upload it to the new one. You have to have a scan tool that is capable of doing that, because if you don't do that process, now that blind spot system is not going to work the way it was supposed to. It can't function without knowing basically where it is and who it is. Yeah. And without having a lot of that attention to detail, there's so many things that can really go wrong. And, there's so much misinformation out there too. We keep on getting inquiries, which can't believe we get these inquiries, but they'll say, do I have to ADAS this part? Because they don't even understand the difference between calibration and what advanced driver assistance system is. And so we have to always explain that part to them, that, well, it's an ADAS system that you need to calibrate, not a part you need to ADAS. So, if you're one of those people that you're not sure about a lot of this stuff, it's not going away. You got to start researching it, learning about it. Go read the articles on the RTS website, the training courses, talk to different service providers. You got to start getting educated. You can't just keep ignoring all this stuff out there. And every time I think we're making headway, we get another call like that, and I just shake my head and go, okay, we got a lot more work to do here.
Yep.
Yeah, Scott, to spin that another way that maybe that person would understand that is when you look at a hybrid or an EV and it doesn't have a belt that turns an AC compressor, right? So it's an AC compressor that is fully electric. It runs on high voltage, right? And they're used to charging AC systems because they've done that for years, right? And they always crank the car up, put the fans on high, and make sure the little snowflake is lit up and all that good stuff. And so with those cars, you have to turn on a scan tool to initialize and to turn on the AC compressor in a lot of cases. And so that's a way. Electric water pumps are another version, right, where they don't have a belt, but it's an electric pump. So you're sending a command to that module and say, okay, turn that on because I'm getting ready to service that system. I'm going to add Freon. I'm going to add coolant, right? And if you think about like ADAS, we're telling a camera to learn. We're telling a camera, okay, I'm going to teach you what the pattern looks like, and I want you to look for it, right? Or I'm going to take you down a road, and I want you to look for street signs, and I want you to look for lines in the road and things like that. So that's essentially what we're doing, And so I just tell the shops, don't assume that we know it. Let's pull it up. If it plugs and plays, great. Then we have no other steps that we need to take, right? But if it doesn't, we need to proactively look at what we need to do. If we can't do this in-house, we need to alert the sublet providers that are going to do this for us, whether it's a dealer or a mobile or whoever it might be, because ADAS calibration doesn't get better with time. If you don't find it in the estimatic stage, it's 100% reactive. And next thing you know, you got a $1,000 radar that you get to replace at the end of the repair. And as these ADAS cars age, that could kick it over the total loss threshold. And so we don't want that. We want to be able to see that proactively and plan for it proactively. And every car will be different. You can count on it. Don't think that, we've done camera systems before, radar systems before, we've got this nailed, And I do the same thing with our guys in our calibration center. I'm like, guys, every car is different. Every model is different. Let's make sure we've got the right plan for this one, So that, I think that's key as it comes to ADAS calibration. Yep,
I would agree. I see we've got a question from somebody out there about iCar courses related to documentation, and that would say yes. If you go to the iCar, and we'll catch this at the end as well, but if you go to the iCar website and go into our vehicle technology and trends section of the course, or I'm sorry, of the website, there is a course in there about testing these systems and best practices for testing the systems and documentation of those tests. So there is a course that iCar has available for documentation of things like that. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, Bud, the training that we went through that I just got finished with Nissan. They had 5 vehicles bugged. The cars were bugged. So we were expected to go in as technicians and diagnose the concern. So in other words, customer states front radar is inactive, have a warning light on the dash about radar unavailable. Go fix it, And so we had to dig through this thing. We had to do guided fault finding with the scan tool to figure out what the faults were, if there were any. Not all systems triggered a fault, so that's another problem. And then we had to look at what repairs were done, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of testing. I mean, we had to break out digital volt and ohm meters. There's a lot of body shops that still have those. The camera system on the Rogue is a 6-volt system, 12. So we had to dig through that, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff that, on the rear view camera, we had to dig through on how does it get reversing signal from the transmission? The Titan gets it from the taillight relay. So there you go. Same manufacturer, 2 different models, 2 different ways it gets reverse signal. So that reverse signal turns on the reverse lights, turns on a rear view monitor, and rear cross traffic alert if it's equipped. So it was intense, man. I'm telling you, it was really tough. It wasn't clear a code and walk away. So it was like I said, it's, learning how to use the wiring diagrams, certainly being able to run scan tools and electrical tools and stuff like that. Those are areas of opportunity for the collision repairs. And I don't want to attack a collision repair, because when we go to a dealership and we deal with a service technician, they don't understand body structure. I think that most of the folks on the call would understand when a frame is twisted over and when it's swayed over and all that stuff, and know what kind of correct action they need to take to correct that. A service technician at a dealership doesn't understand that. They're like, wow, this thing was at a body shop. They couldn't tell you what to do to actually correct that issue. So, I've said it before. I think that if you're not good at being on the mechanical side of the fence, whether it's, diagnostics or it's electrical wiring diagrams, running digital volt and ohm meters, that's training you need to take. That's things that you need to get comfortable with. And if you're a service technician, you need to understand body structure and how these systems, how it relates to these systems and the way they're mounted.
Yep, agreed. All right.
So
I think that wraps it up for us. Like I just said just a minute ago, if you want to take more courses or get more information about ADAS and the training that iCar has available, go to the iCar website, click on our Vehicle Technology and Trends tab, and it will take you in, and you can see all these ADAS courses available to help you get the information you need to repair these vehicles properly.
mhm. And our next webinar is going to be on August 25th, and when the ADAS calibration does not work. So that one will get into a lot of the kind of what Jake was talking about, where okay, we thought we had this one ready to go, and now what do we have to do to figure out what's wrong with this vehicle?
Yep.
So I think that's going to be a fun one, and I think Professor Poole will be back for that one, and just living a dream with that conversation.
Yep, I agree. That's right up Jeff's wheelhouse. He loves that stuff. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
All right. And looks like we did have one more question that showed in. How critical is thrust line alignment to an ADAS calibration?
Huge.
Yeah, I think you picked up on my comment about researching how to do an alignment in the first place, right? And it's, to answer his question, it's very critical. When you change the way that car sees the road, you create a problem if you don't do the camera alignment. So some specific ones that I would call out to go look up your Fords, like a Ford Fusion, or your Subarus. Subarus call it out as well. They call out for an eyesight calibration in the event of alignment. So look at those brands, and you'll see where they've done a good job of entailing, if there is a camera calibration required because of alignment, they put it in the alignment procedure, not in the camera's procedure, or they might put it in both. But I really like that they put it in the alignment procedure, because that's what we did, right? That was the repair operation. ADAS calibrations are driven off repair operations, not necessarily DTCs or any of that kind of stuff. So check those repair operations real close.
All right. And it doesn't look like we have any other comments coming in. So thanks, Jake, for joining us, and I'm glad we were able to figure out the technology issues and get you on the call today.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care.